When President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan spoke, the world listened. This unforgettable moment, shaking political and diplomatic circles, left millions wondering, what did Erdoğan really say to Trump? It all started with a phone call no one saw coming. Donald Trump's assistant announced, "Mr. President, what's his angle?" he asked, but his eyes narrowed with curiosity. 2 days later, in a quiet, heavily guarded meeting room in New York, Trump walked in wearing his signature confidence. On the other side of the table sat Recep Tayyip Erdoğan, whose experience and charisma filled the room. His presence conveyed both the gravity of a statesman and an unshakable will. Trump extended his hand, and Erdoğan took it firmly. But what followed wasn't the usual diplomatic small talk. Instead, Erdoğan leaned forward and said in a resonant voice, "Mr. Trump, I did not come here to discuss fleeting alliances or trade deals. I came to speak to you about something far more enduring." The room went still. Even Trump's security detail exchanged glances. Erdoğan added, "I came to speak of justice and of history's verdict on leaders, and of the only true source of that justice, the Creator." Trump's smirk faded. It wasn't expecting this, and from that moment, the conversation took a turn that would stun the entire world. Trump had met countless leaders, businessmen, and generals. Most of them danced around their words, hiding their true intentions. But Erdoğan spoke not like a man with nothing to lose, but like a man with a 1,000-year legacy behind him. "Mr. Trump," he began, "I have seen wars. I have managed crises. I have watched leaders rise and fall. But there is one thing I have learned. Without justice, the soul of a nation rots from within." Trump leaned back, arms folded, studying him. "This justice you're talking about," he said slowly. "Whose justice? Yours or mine?" Erdoğan shook his head. "No, neither mine nor yours. I speak of the justice of Caliph Omar, who entered Jerusalem as a servant, holding the reins of his own camel. I speak of the commander whose army stood guard at the doors of churches." Trump chuckled lightly, but something in Erdoğan's steady eyes made him stop. "I have seen people survive hopelessness because they trusted in a just ruler," Erdoğan continued. "And I have seen powerful men destroy their people and themselves because they thought they were gods." The air in the room grew heavier. Outside, the city roared as usual, but inside, time seemed to slow. Trump's expression grew a little more serious. "What makes you so sure?" "Because power is a test, not a possession. All that remains is the legacy you leave behind. History forgets neither the tyrant nor the just. And most importantly, God does not forget." Trump was silent. No clever comeback, no smirk. For the first time that day, his eyes dropped to the table. A journalist in the corner assigned to cover the meeting quietly. Something that would shake both political and diplomatic circles before the week was over. Few long seconds, Trump didn't say a word. The man who was always quick to respond now seemed contemplative. Erdoğan didn't push. He simply waited. His eyes were calm, almost like the deep waters of the Bosphorus. "So, you're saying Trump, finally, spoke that the secret to leadership is accountability?" Erdoğan smiled faintly. "Not just to the people, to history. And ultimately, knowing you will be held accountable by God. When leaders think they are masters, they destroy their people." This wasn't a lecture. It was a truth spoken by a man who had lived it and was still living it. Trump's hand tapped the table slowly. His eyes narrowed. Outside, rain began to fall against the windows, each drop echoing in the silence. A member of Trump's staff leaned in to whisper something in his ear, but Trump raised his hand to stop them. "Let him finish," he said. Somewhere in that moment, the air in the room changed. The meeting was no longer political. "Donald, when you look at those towers you built, what do you want people to remember 100 years from now? The steel and the glass, or the man who built them? And what kind of man was he?" Trump's eyes flickered, not with anger, but with something else. An accounting, perhaps? "Don't talk about these things," Trump said, his voice guarded. "That is precisely why I am asking," Erdoğan replied, "because men like you are told you must never show hesitation, never reflect." Even the journalists had stopped scribbling. Every camera in the room was recording, but nobody dared interrupt. "You think I don't believe?" Trump asked after a long pause. Erdoğan didn't answer directly. Instead, he slowly turned the ring on his finger, the one bearing the Ottoman tugra. "Belief is not a claim. It is a demonstration. It is to not deviate from justice, even in the most difficult of times. Trump swallowed hard. I've made mistakes, big ones. Erdoğan leaned closer. The door of repentance is always open. Donald, what matters is having the will to turn towards that door. Trump didn't move for a moment. His lips parted slightly. Then his hands gripped the edge of the table. He looked around at his aides and the cameras. Then, shockingly, he waved the cameras off. This is not for the world, he said firmly. This is a conversation beyond the headlines. Half the journalists looked stunned. This was Donald Trump, the man who thrived in front of cameras, now turning them away. The media crew hesitated until he gave a sharp nod. Why do you believe so much? Erdogan's eyes softened. Because I saw the power of God in the will of my people, in their eyes as they stood with their faith against tanks on the night of July 15th. I saw that true power is not in the barrel of a gun, but in a heart that believes. And none of that came from my power. It came from his alone. Erdoğan stood up slowly. He walked to the window in the room and looked out. The time for the afternoon prayer is near. I must offer my gratitude to my Lord. Trump's jaw tightened. The proud exterior was still there, but something in his eyes had shifted. The room waited. Finally, Trump gave a slow nod. Go ahead, he said. Erdoğan had not asked for permission, merely stated his duty. He took off his jacket and turned to a corner of the room. With his back to Trump, he faced the Qibla and began to pray. The sound of Allahu Akbar echoed in the silence of the room. Trump was witnessing a scene he had never seen before. Beyond politics, power, money, a head of state was bowing before a power far greater than himself in the presence of the most powerful man in the world. He didn't understand the words being prayed, but he could feel the submission and sincerity in the posture. When Erdoğan finished his prayer, the silence was almost unbearable. Trump lifted his head, his eyes red but steady. You don't know what you just did, he said quietly. You. You reminded me what leadership is. And at that moment, the entire week's events began to take a turn no one could have predicted. The next day, the White House press room was overflowing. Journalists from every continent were packed shoulder to shoulder. Trump walked to the podium, his usual confident swagger now a bit more somber. Erdoğan followed, calm and steady.